Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group, and also hosted by losing like 50% of your frames. So hopefully this isn't absolutely awful of an experience for everybody tonight. But regardless, we're going to plow on as long as I can, assuming that, internet connectivity is willing to bear this awful load of one person streaming. Anyhow, we have with us Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Doing well. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
And Mike and Tracy are both out on secret assignments. We can't really talk about them because otherwise they wouldn't be secret. So that's where they're at. Shop Talk. Welcome if this is your first time. Quick primer on what Shop Talk is. It's a way for us to get together on a Monday evening after work, kick our feet back, metaphorically speaking, because I am standing up and kicking my feet back would be difficult. Mala could kick her feet back, but would be difficult for me. I can't levitate. So, kick our feet back and talk a little bit of tech, talk a little bit of data platform stuff. It is open Q&A, so if you have any questions, please do drop them into chat. This is a wonderful opportunity to derail me as well. Absolutely. Anders is right on point. So if you want to drop me off into some kind of a rant, there are a lot of buttons that you can push. So, first topic of the evening is our TriPass board. There are actually two open board positions. Open in the sense that we are going to have an election. Mike and Tracy are the two current sitters, people who are seated in those board positions. And as far as I'm aware, they're both running again. But nominations are open if you would like to throw your hat into the ring and run one of the 5 board positions for TriPass. Yes, they are incumbents, and yeah, that's probably the better term for it. Yes, the proper term, incumbent. Versus people what done sitting on them dare boards. So we have, if you're interested in throwing your hat in the ring and going for one of those positions, let me know. You can let me know via email. You can let me know via Meetup. Basically, if you are a TriPass member in good standing, in other words, you've joined us at meetup.com/TriPass, you are actually eligible to be on the board. So if you are interested in that, let me know. Otherwise, nominations are open until November 17th, after which point the elections will run December 7th through the 21st. So during that time, we'll have our election. If we only have the 2 nominees, then we'll just do a single slate. If we do have multiple nominees, we'll have to come up with a different approach for voting. Haven't had to do that yet, but if you want to, again, run for one of those positions, we'll sort it all out. The next thing that I want to cover, because we're still early on in the show, our plan for the rest of the year for TriPass. As you would figure, this is right about the time when TriPass gets a little bit less busy. This Tuesday, which is tomorrow, TriPass board member Rick Pack will be talking to us about some things that he's learned from running through a Kaggle competition. We'll have an opportunity to pick his brain a little bit and listen to some of the things that he's learned along the way. So that will be the last data science and business intelligence meeting for the year 2023. We'll pick that up again 4th Tuesday in January of 2024. The Advanced DBA group will not meet in November because that would be the week of both Pass Summit and Live 360. I'll be at Live 360. I know Tracy will be at Pass Summit. Mala, will you be virtually attending Pass Summit?
There's no virtual option this year, so no.
Oh, it's in person only?
Yep. My
Okay.
first time I'm not attending Pass Summit in 24 years. I'm still
Wow.
trying to come to terms with it. But it's what it is. Yep.
Yeah. Anders will be there. I assume there is both places. He's just going to fly overnight from West Coast to East Coast, make it in the morning to go to Live 360, fly West Coast to make it to Pass Summit, be at both places at once. I actually tried to work out the logistics of that, where I would be at Past Summit for a day or two and then go to Live 360 to do my presentations. It didn't work. I couldn't make the math work. But there are two in Seattle at the same time. Yes, there's also, I think, what is it, Microsoft Build? There's a Microsoft event. Ignite, right. Yeah, so
Same street, a block away.
Wow. That's planting your flag. But so there are going to be 3 conferences in the same building. Really? It'll be, what are they doing? One side of the convention center and the other side of the convention center?
Uh-huh.
Maybe that annex that's across the street.
Yes, the one that they were building when we
Yeah.
attended to the pre-COVID times, they were building it.
Okay. Well, don't think you'll be able to sneak in from one to the other. They'll have different badges. But I'm not going to stop you. So Andrew says Microsoft really does not like Redgate. I don't think that's the case. I
think Ignite is set up at levels way higher than anything to do with database folks.
Yeah. At your average Ignite, there will be 1 or 2 database sessions max. And usually it'll be Power Platform. There's a lot of .NET. There's a lot of Office 365. There's a lot of even like Dynamics and the like. So the average Ignite attendee is really more of a VP or C level. That's who they're really trying to draw in, versus Past Summit, which is intended for that data platform technician or the developers or database administrators. So I can see both conferences running concurrently and people just not having a huge amount of overlap. I know that there are some speakers in the data platform community who do sessions at Ignite, and that's probably where you'll get most of your data platform content. And I could see some MVPs or some community speakers moving over to the other building for a few hours to do a co-hosted session at Ignite. So I agree, Mala. I think this is more complementary than it is directly competitive, versus Live 360, which is absolutely competitive. Because Live 360, you do have application developers, security people, you have business practitioners, Office 365 and the like, but you also have a lot of artificial intelligence and database development and administration there. So you kind of have your 2 sides of the country running a conference at the same time, and there will be a little bit of a split with some data platform people, but most of them probably will be at Past Summit. I'll be at the other place. So, long story short, no advanced DBA meeting in November, and no data science meeting in November, which means our only meeting in November will be the main meeting. And unless I've got it wrong, it's going to be Mala talking to us about query trees, hierarchies, and graphs.
I don't know if I'm going to have time to make that talk, but I'll talk on something. That much I promise.
All right, so Mala's going to do something.
Yeah.
We're going to welcome in special guest star Jared Poche. How you doing, Jared?
Guest star, the comedic stylings of Kevin Fiesel. I'm good, man. How are you?
Fantastic. So we are live and on the air and welcoming you in. Anders is leaving. Oh, no.
What brings you in today, Jared?
Why not? That's what brings me in.
Perfect. So we're talking about what the TriPass plans are for the rest of the year. Summarizing, data science meeting tomorrow. Jared and I can't be in the same place. You're actually the same person. It's really weird. You don't look or sound the same, but I don't make the rules. Data science meeting tomorrow. In November, we will only have one main meeting. That will be with Mala. So that will be hybrid, in person and online. And then December, we've got 2 meetings. our advanced DBA meeting, so we will have one of those in December. Torsten Strauss is going to talk to us about memory grants. Had a chance to see Torsten at Data Relay. I think he was in Birmingham, so only there for one day. But talking about memory grants for us. And on the 19th of December, we'll have Serbi Pakama, whose name I probably mispronounced, talking about applying the security mindset to Azure Synapse Analytics. So that's going to be what we're doing for the rest of the year. Should be a pretty good time. And by the way, if you are local and you are interested in doing a presentation, reach out to us, especially if you're interested in doing one in person. We will have slots available for the main meeting for most of the year. Tracy has already worked on filling in some of those slots, but there are still slots open. So if you're interested in doing a session, especially one that's in person at our main meeting, do reach out. I'll put you in touch. Either reach out directly to Tracy or reach out to me, and I'll give you the link for submitting. We'll open up the general call for speakers in a little bit, but at least for now, if you want to do this in person at the main meeting, do reach out, because we want to fill that up as much as we can up front, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. Next, got an article from a couple of weeks ago. This one I wanted to get to on the last episode of Shop Talk, but we had a lot of topics. So we're going to share a screen now and talk about this Michael J. Swart article. So Michael wrote about a use case with read committed snapshot isolation and running into a potential problem. Let me drop a link to that in chat so that everybody's going to be able to look at that on their own time, because it is a good article. Basically, what Michael was doing was showing off, hey, here's a weird thing that can pop up if you are using read committed snapshot isolation and you're building an ETL process. So what he's got is a database, which is using RCSI, and then a table that is just some log table. And he wants to move the contents of the log table over into some other location. So we have our logs table and inserting some default values into there. Then a procedure to fetch any new logs. And the way that he's got this optimized is we figure out what's the last ID that successfully got processed, and then process the next batch of X, the next batch of 1,000 or 500 or whatever number is comfortable for your ETL process. And then he grabs the next set of values. So he's grabbing, actually, in this case, I take that back. He's doing everything after the latest point. So if that's 500, if that's 1,000, if that's 806, get all of them. Now, here's what the problem is if you're using read committed snapshot isolation. In this case, we have session A inserting a new row into logs, so log ID 4. Session B begins a transaction, inserts log ID 5, but leaves the transaction open. Then session A inserts, and because the identity integer, which he's using, that is outside of transactions, it kind of exists outside the scope of a single transaction so that you don't have duplicates. Well, session A, when it inserts, it's going to take the next value, 6. So we have 5 that's floating in ether right now. That row has not been written into the table, and anybody querying the logs table right now will see 4, will see 6, will not see 5. So if you run this naive procedure, then it will give you back 4 and 6, will not give you back 5 because that has not been committed or rolled back yet. So I don't consider this a major problem. I do agree with Michael here. There's no defect. It's not a bug in SQL Server. It's not a bug in operation. If anything, it's a failure of understanding of how read committed snapshot isolation works in a procedure, and the expectation that with an identity column, you can't have insertion outside of the ascending pattern. And you certainly can if you have slow transactions. Yeah, totally expected behavior. I fully agree. And therefore, it's important, instead of writing it this way, there are several other ways that you could handle this type of ETL process. So, give you a couple of ideas. One, if this is relatively infrequently processed, I could see going back and where you say after log ID equals to 3, say, give me the prior 500 rows plus however many come after this. And yes, I'll be reprocessing some rows, but one of the important rules of ETL processes is that your ETL processes should be idempotent, meaning if you run this multiple times, you still end up with the same end result. So if you have ID 5 and some data for ID 5, and you run this process once that it picks up ID 5, it makes sure that there is one row in your destination with ID 5. If you run it again, it makes sure that there is exactly one row. There is no additional row created, and it doesn't break your process. This does require a little bit of effort on the ETL process creator's side of things, where that person will have to think about the scenarios. What happens if a record gets reprocessed? And in that event, you're writing your process to be safe against repeated operation. So that's one mechanism. Go back a certain number of rows, because most likely that transaction is not going to be open long enough for you to have 500 additional rows. If that is actually a legitimate possibility, there may come a point where you say, no, I can't do that. And in that case, we have another approach, and that could be to have basically a queue table, where the queue table says, here are all of the records that I need to get ETL processed. And when we insert a record into this logs table, either have a trigger insert into a queue row, or if you can control access through stored procedure, you can have that stored procedure insert into the queue table as well. And now your ETL process, instead of saying, give me all the values after ID whatever, say, give me the top 1,000 values from this queue table, and then process that and delete those records from the queue. You could do what Anders says and use replication. If you just want to push over the same data, if you want to make significant transformations, replication may not be your best fit. But if you just need to have this data pushed to another location without any significant changes, yeah, replication works fine for that. You could also use Service Broker, where you insert rows and now you queue up a message for Service Broker to act, and then Service Broker can perform the ETL processing. Not sure that I would do that on a really high scale table, but yeah, that's another option. I'm throwing these things off the top of my head. Jared or Molly, you have any ideas that you would go for in this scenario?
Nothing else that immediately pops to mind. It is just really an interesting observation that it behaves this way. I guess the key thing is making sure that you understand when you're using it, really know how these identity values get allocated, and that they're kind of outside of transactions is a really good point. Sequences are more complicated, but you would probably run up with the same problem if you were doing a sequence instead.
Yeah, I would agree. You certainly would, because your sequence would be you would basically go to the sequence generator and say, give me a number, and then you would insert into the table. So you would definitely need to do that. Change data capture. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of your prerequisite for ETL. So yes, you could use change data capture and say, give me all of the records that have changed since I've looked at it last.
Other thought was, what if you used, instead of just the log ID, what if you used a date time value? But then my question would be, but I guess the value inserted for that logs table record for session 5 would still depend on when the insert happened originally, as opposed to when the transaction committed. So that doesn't really solve the problem here.
Right. Yeah, you just run into the same problem, just in a more complicated form.
Unless you're using a status value or something else like that, you could always tack on something like that, but that just makes it more complicated.
Yeah, actually, that is another option where you have some has been ETL'd flag, and now we just need to grab everything where has been ETL'd is equal to 0.
Quite.
And yeah, so Molly, you say I would just look out for some app code that assumes the previous is always a +1 increment. Right, because when we develop these things, we just immediately think, okay, I'll take the current value. I know where I've gotten so far. I'll add 1 to it, and then everything will be great. And
I'm actually dealing with some code that's doing exactly that. That's just assuming that the previous entity was just a +1 increment and calling another procedure with the same argument, which it's not going to do anything bad except that that call is just not going to work. And if they don't have proper error handling, they're going to get all sorts of
all sorts of issues. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a little bit of a problem. Andrew says global cursor obviously needs to be invented. No. Get out of here. I thought you were
You
leaving.
and your cursors, Anders.
I know.
Solomon says, yeah, I'd probably just do a trigger. Yeah, a trigger is, I would say for this kind of an ETL process, a trigger is a fine solution.
Trigger is good. Yeah.
It's probably not the most elegant. It's probably not the absolute most efficient, but it is fine. And it's rare that you run into a situation where this ends up being the main problem on a SQL Server instance, that you have a trigger into a queue table and that's just overwhelming a system somehow. So I would agree. It's a fine solution. It is certainly one that if I saw it, I would not say, oh, we've got to get rid of this. It's bad. But there are several routes around this. Actually, the first solution that I threw out here, which was take this number and subtract some value from it, that's probably the hackiest of all the solutions that we mentioned. It's not a great solution, but it's also a case where as long as you're not reprocessing, as long as your reprocessing isn't enormously expensive, yeah, it still works. And this is, again, probably not the thing that's going to knock over your server. There will be something else that knocks over your server. So Michael does go on a little bit better. Actually, he has one solution here of pessimistic locking, where, yeah, if you're willing to block until session A is done inserting, okay. I don't tend to like that because I've gone whole hog into read committed snapshot isolation. I think optimistic concurrency ought to be the default for SQL Server. It is the default for Oracle and Postgres. It is the default in Azure SQL Database. There's really no reason for it not to be the default for SQL Server. I think we just have to, we turn that on because you get major benefits from it, like not blocking. Like if you need this ETL job to finish and you've got something blocking that's taking a while to insert, or you've got a lot of insertions, this job might not be able to work. And while it's running, you may or may not be able to insert into the table. So you may have your reader blocking writers. And that could end up being an issue. This could end up being a bigger issue than the occasional, I need to figure out that there was a row that was missing. Timestamp data type. I don't think the timestamp data type would actually fix this, Anders. The reason would be...
Yeah, I think it would be the same.
Yeah.
It would be the same, that the time is going to come from the point when the insert happened, not when the commit happened.
Right. And even the SQL Server timestamp, which is some weird binary value, even that, I think you're still going to end up in a case where by not committing that snapshot, or excuse me, not committing that transaction, but inserting the record, and then somebody else inserting a record after that, that you're going to have a fill-in value. You'd be forced not to look for the max value. Yeah,
I've never
which
used that hint with read committed lock. That is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, read committed
My
lock.
thought was if you were going to use a hint, why wouldn't you just say with read uncommitted at that point? And shouldn't that let you see the 5 anyway?
Right, right, with no lock. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
would.
That's something
Well,
people understand. Yeah.
it would, but then if the transaction fails, you've now written a bad value into your ETL process on
Oh,
the other
yeah.
It
side.
depends on what your process is doing at that point. If it's taking the 5 and expect and doing something, adding it to somewhere else. But if it's like, using it in a table variable or something and trying to join back, it could work, but it would depend on the rest of the implementation.
Yeah, I would consider this to be less satisfactory than most of the solutions we talked about. I would rather do after log ID minus some number rather than force this to block. And I think that's probably where I'd be at on it. I know that after log ID minus some number would be less efficient on the whole, but I don't know. I don't like this idea of introducing additional blocking when you don't really need it to block. And at this point, I fairly strongly prefer a queue table, especially if you are heavily using read committed snapshot isolation and you have some rapidly inserted records. You have a lot of records being inserted. I get that you're doubling the number of inserts because you're inserting into logs table plus into log queue, which is a funny table name. And then if it's going to a Kafka topic, it'd be a log queue log. But with no lock everywhere, surely that would help. Yeah, just add no lock to everything. That's especially your update statements. Update with no lock. By the way, I've on several occasions at several companies, I have seen people update with no lock, delete with no lock, and I look at this and say, you should be very happy that this does not work the way you expect it to work. Because if it worked the way you expected it to work, you would have major consistency problems in your database.
I did see it work that way one time, and it caused access violations, and I ended up having to visit a customer for it.
Yeah, that must have been an old version of SQL Server.
It might have been 2005 or 2008. Certainly
Okay.
was before 2012 existed, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I think in the pre-RCSI days, just like somebody threw out that number 300 for PLE, they just threw something out to shut people up because there wasn't any way for you to avoid this kind of blocking between reads and writes. If the stuff is not written in the right order, there was no way out of it. So they just said, okay, here you go, okay, just shut up and go away. This will
Right.
fix it. And that
Yeah.
started, right? Yeah.
Well, snapshot mode existed, but snapshot mode has its own foibles. And I mean, basically, recommitted snapshot is a compromise on snapshot mode, where
Huh.
there are,
Snapshot. I never used that, Kevin. I have not seen any place use that.
yeah.
Snapshot.
So I'm gonna pull this up. Meanwhile, Anders has with no lock and read past. That's a combination. I will certainly grant that that is a combination. So you're going to read dirty data, but you're only going to read dirty data that somebody else hasn't locked. I'm actually not sure how that works.
I have no idea.
On a delete, both of those should be ignored, I would think. Read past wouldn't be ignored. I don't know. I have no idea how that would work. That might be worth weird experimentation. In the meantime,
Read past can't be specified when the read committed snapshot database option is set to on.
that would make sense. I mean, read past is basically saying if somebody else has a read lock, then continue. Don't block on that. Just continue as though that row didn't exist. And with
Mm-hmm.
RCSI, you really don't have read locks.
Mm-hmm. Cheat sheet for snapshot and RCSI. Interesting.
Yeah,
Wow, 2016. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So Kendra's got this article. It took me 26 years of working with SQL to see read past in the wild. Yeah, Mala, you mentioned seeing read past before. I know we had showed up as a
Yeah, we
topic.
had a discussion just less than 2 weeks ago with a table, a queue table, where I work, some legacy code with a queue table that uses a lot of read past.
Two
Yeah,
very interesting words, legacy code.
usually a source of pain. So RCSI versus snapshot. Basically, here's what Kendra comes up with. This is her guidance for when you would want to use one versus the other. I almost always land on RCSI. It's rare that I would use snapshot, but here's the example that in pure data warehouses, even pure data warehouses, I'm still okay with recommitted snapshot isolation. But here's Kendra's example of why you might not want to use RCSI. Existing OLTP application databases that have report queries running against them. And the reason that you would not want RCSI would be the risk of race conditions, where you're reading data that is in some in between state because maybe you're not using transactions on inserting all of the records into tables. So it is a rare situation where if you're doing a lot of analytical report querying and you have an OLTP application that is very heavily write based, insert write based, then there can be a risk that you would want to test against you if you're using recommitted snapshot isolation. If you're using snapshot for the reporting and just read committed for the transactional database portion, then you wouldn't have this potential problem. And I want to see if Kendra has the specific example here. In the meantime, Solomon says that might have been my code, the repass. No, it wasn't. It was. It actually wasn't your code, Solomon. Used it once for a Q table, just don't remember where exactly. Yeah, this was a different case, so you're off the hook this time. Now, under RCSI, readers cannot block writers, writers cannot block readers, and that's why read pass doesn't matter because you're not blocking. Readers aren't blocking at all. But the problem with RCSI, race conditions, so not related to performance, and the problem is you give you incorrect data that is not a bug. So application code, if your application code expects pessimistic locking, you're writing a report, you're expecting it to block until your writer is done, the reader will happily read, ignore the work that is in progress from the writer because writers aren't blocking, and return back data which is not exactly the same as by the time the report finishes what the data looks like in the database. So that's the idea. And so Kendra's example, company sells bunny slippers online. Huge sale, 99% off, but only for the first 100 customers. So code selects the number of coupons from dbo.coupons. If the number is less than 100, update the number to coupons used plus 1, and then proceed with checkout. And in this case, if you have shared locks, if somebody else is writing to that table, you're blocking and you're protecting that shared resource. Because at that point, that one row in dbo.coupons is, yeah, it's probably one row. Or, yeah, it would have to be one row, I think. That dbo.coupon table that has a column of coupons used is a shared resource. You, in computer science terms, you would want to have a mutex or a semaphore to protect it because you'll have multiple threads, multiple processes trying to update that data, but you have to protect it so that multiple processes don't try to update it serially and mess up your numbers, especially if you're talking about an update, if you're talking about an increment. So this feels like a bad database design, honestly. And this is probably why it's extremely rare to find actual problems with RCSI in the wild. But it is something that could happen. If you have a column on dbo.coupon that says number of coupons used, and you increment that, add 1 to it every time somebody uses it, and the way that you get the number of current coupons is you select the number of coupons used so far. So I query that table, it says 48. I add 1 to it and I update it and I say make it 49. Well, if 25 people all do this at once, your number may still end up being 49 because everybody queried it, got 48, did their work, came back, everybody wrote to it, it's now 49. Kind of a messy scenario, but it is actually a possibility. All right, from now on, all my databases will be in single user mode. Well, Anders, I think they were already. You just have to be the first user. You just have to be the single user. That's the real catch. But one of the DBs we moved from to 2022 from 2014 has never been an RCSI. What testing would we do to verify it? Any thoughts on that, Mala or Jared? I'm gonna drink some water while I let you vamp.
I'm not sure I followed the question.
So Anders has a database updated, let's say it's now in SQL Server 2022, and never been an RCSI, never been recommitted snapshot isolation. What kind of testing would you do to make sure that recommitted snapshot isolation actually does work for this database, that it does not introduce any problems?
So from my experience, the potential problem it can introduce is that too much usage of TempDB. So if TempDB is a hassle, maybe that might be some testing to do to see if it behaves like you think it should, or it is too much for your system to handle.
That can be a risk, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect TempDB to be a major problem, but especially in cases where you've got fast storage, SSD or NVMe.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, especially early on in the days of spinning disk.
Mm-hmm.
So this database handles money transactions. Yes, you want to make really sure of it. The recommendation, the easy mode recommendation, by easy mode I mean easy for me, not easy for you, would be figure out what the normal workload is. Knowing that this is handling monetary transactions, hopefully there is a pretty solid test suite available for that database, for operations on that database, and that you're able to run through it in read committed snapshot isolation mode. I would look for cases where there are these sorts of updates on heavily shared resources, because inserts are fine. Updates on non-shared resources are fine. And what I mean by that is if I have, say, a user table and I'm updating the attributes of a user, you're probably not going to have dozens of people updating the same user at the same time. And if they are updating the same user at the same time, but they're all setting a value as opposed to trying to increment something, then it doesn't matter. Last right wins, just like in pessimistic concurrency. So the scenario that I see as a problem would be this one right here that Kendra mentions, where you have updating a shared resource with a lot of concurrent writers that are where the expected behavior depends on those writers blocking each other. It also has a lot of deadlocks per hour. I mean, I would also say if your database has a whole lot of deadlocks, yeah, read commit a snapshot isolation would be a good thing to look into. Also, trying to figure out why exactly there are so many deadlocks. I mean, I am definitely not a person who freaks out about deadlocks because my rule of thumb is for any sufficiently heavily used database, there will be some number of deadlocks. It's just a way of life. Deadlock sounds scary. It's a very, very scary sounding term. But the practical guidance is, yeah, sure, just try writing again. Try it again, see what you get. Depends on how much and what dies. Yeah, yeah, I agree.
I was going to say it's called a deadlock, but nobody's actually dying, right?
Hopefully.
So, actual story. Jared and me, the system that we are working at, they have a process where the maintenance job, the index maintenance job, dies every night on a deadlock with some process. That is, it does online reindexing and it does all the hard work of building a new index. And when it comes to swapping the index, it gets into a deadlock and it dies. And it's been dying for months. Their indexes have not been rebuilt for months. So that's not the kind of deadlock that you want to keep on happening. Just saying.
Yeah, that's true.
There's that.
Yeah.
That is true, and I think I remember that scenario. I think I remember what you're talking about. Yeah, yeah, and that's where you say, all right, well, when can we do this at a time when that other thing isn't running? And this can require some sophistication. If they haven't had reindex in months, turn off reindexing. You just deal with it. Just drop and recreate the indexes every few months.
Well, I can't say I haven't heard that suggestion and not from Anders. So
Not from Anders, right? That is actually kind of a starting point of have you heard it from anywhere other than Anders? That should be on the flow chart of do I believe this solution? I had one system where I could only do reindex on one table over Thanksgiving weekend when nobody was working on it, and then you just couldn't do it the rest of the time. Now, deadlock monitoring query having deadlocks. Oh, yeah, that'll happen. Idera was at one point in time really bad about that. They got better. 800 gigabyte table in 2001. All right, well, that's a hefty boy. That's the type of thing. Now, also does remind me of when Jeff Moden did the presentation for our user group, talking about how, hey, in a lot of cases, rebuilding indexes is a bad idea. That we're spending a lot of time rebuilding things that are just going to get back to their natural state. And so instead, plan things out appropriately and try to avoid certain practices. And that way, you don't have to rebuild constantly. Century One managed to get deadlocks on their deadlock tracking table. You know, if you've never done that before and you're a monitoring company, maybe you're just not trying hard enough. Because I think now that's 3 companies that we have either inferred or explicitly stated have deadlocks and deadlock tracking processes. It happens.
That's a lot of fun.
I rewrote their procedure for them. Hopefully they accepted it. I know a lot of vendors tend to be a bit tetchy about people looking at their code and doing things with it and making it better.
Well, when John Martin was there, I've rewritten a lot of procedures for them, and he was super happy about that. He was very, very open. When they lost John, quite a lot of their stuff went down. Yeah.
John Martin's he's good people.
Yes.
But yeah, I know of vendors where they'll say, oh, you added indexes to our database and now we're not going to support it. And so you end up writing scripts to drop those indexes before you have a support call, and then after the support call, you run the other script to recreate the indexes.
Unfortunately, pretty standard.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, look, your database does not work in this situation. I won't say in general. Maybe it's specific organizations have specific use patterns that are different. Anders, this is a nice script. Hey, okay. So you got something nice from Greg Gonzalez. So yeah, there confirmed there were at least two people at Century One back when Century One was Century One, who were willing to accept community feedback, and I'm sure that there were others. You know, I don't want to make it sound like these are the only two people who have ever accepted community feedback or accepted user feedback appropriately. It's just
So, on a slightly related note,
hmm?
anyone working with the latest latest update of Plan Explorer that SolarWinds put out and having it open a new instance for every new plan, it is so annoying. It is so annoying. And I don't know if it has something to do with SSMS or Plan Explorer yet. I have that problem. Vanita had that problem too, and I don't. I was wondering if somebody else experienced it.
I figure it's the way they've made Plan Explorer to work too. The other thing
Right.
is that whenever you open a new plan, it kind of goes back to its default configuration, and you know, as opposed to bringing it up the way you always set it up. So that's a little tedious.
Okay. So
So is
you're
that
saying it's intentional, Jared?
I'm saying that when I use it, it always brings it up in a new window. So I think that's the way it's intended at the moment.
Okay.
that
I
could be. Now, is that when you're in Management Studio, you right click and you say Open in Plan
uh-huh,
Explorer?
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really even do that anymore. I just use open up Plan Explorer, and in the plan window, I paste in I'll paste in the execution plan
Hmm.
itself, or I'll paste
Mm-hmm.
in the query and then execute it from Plan Explorer directly,
Mm. Okay.
which has its pros and cons. Biggest pro is it avoids some of that mess,
Mm.
but uh, yeah, it could be, like Andrew says, actually, not so much 2022, could be the latest version of SQL Server Management Studio. So the latest Visual Studio IDE
Yeah.
shell.
Yeah. I haven't tried if it does the same thing with Azure Data Studio because Azure Data Studio has its own stuff, its own stuff that is not. I would say it's not up to Plan Explorer, but it's pretty decent. What Erin and her team have done.
I agree. I think
Yeah.
Azure Data Studio's execution plan viewer has gotten to the point where it is at least in near proximity to what SQL Server Management Studio has. I still prefer,
Except for Query Store, and there are a few bugs. There
yeah,
are definitely bugs, but I like it. I love it. It's friendly on my eyes, and I love that the dark mode and the color things, and I love the vertical lines that help with code alignment and all of that. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, those are the sorts of things that Azure Data Studio is really driving toward. It's that code writing and query tuning experience that they're trying to drive at.
yeah.
SSMS 19, there are things I cannot do in SQL Server 2022 that work in SSMS 18. That sounds like some crummy bugs. I'm gonna.
What are those things? And what about what doesn't work for you in SSMS 19?
While Anders is typing that in, by the way, the follow up on this is read committed snapshot isolation. There are specific circumstances where you can run into a problem. If you use snapshot isolation, it is allow snapshot isolation, but you have to set your transaction isolation level to snapshot. So what that means is that for your report queries, you could explicitly set transaction level to snapshot, and then run the query, and it would run based off of what the snapshot value is. So that is a reasonable solution. I would say I don't know that I've ever used snapshot isolation in a production environment on purpose. So I don't know. I'm not sure how generally useful snapshot isolation is, or if I'm just missing something. But I will say it is definitely not something I've spent. I've used on purpose in multiple places. Certainly not. I don't even remember it in one place. But unfortunately, Anders, speaking of can't remember what was. Oh, right click on a database to get properties. That seems to be a bug.
Right click to get properties. Is he talking of Azure Data Studio or SSMS? Azure Data Studio had that issue. And
Azure Data Studio did have that issue, and it had plenty of issues around connecting to Azure SQL DB. But no, this is SSMS 19 when working on SQL Server 2022 instance. And let me open up Management Studio 19. I probably don't have the latest version. I have 19.1. But what I do have is a SQL Server 2022 instance, and I can go to properties. So newest release of 19. Yeah, that could be it because I've got 19.1. And probably a newer version has come out since then. But that's what you get for updating anything ever. On SSMS 18, it works on all databases. Yeah, so maybe it's a bug. Maybe somebody's reported it. If nobody's reported it, maybe it's worth reporting it. Then you get closed as works by design, and subtly gets edited for future version of SSMS, and it works again, and you're like, oh, I guess it worked by design, huh? Kind of need it for other things in 2022. That's fair. So we do have one more topic that I'm probably going to save for the next episode, because I think we're going to spend a bit of time talking about it. So in the meantime, after what's-her-face left the tools team, do you mean Vicky Harp? Because Aaron Stellato is still on the tools team. And it was, I think it was Vicky Harp who was, yeah, Vicky, okay.
Vicky left the tools team 2 years ago.
Right.
There's been plenty of updates after that. Plenty of them.
Yeah, and Aaron Stellato's done a really good job as PM of that team as well, I think.
Yeah, Erin didn't exactly take Vicky's place. She's one role below as PM.
Okay.
Vicky managed the team. So they have somebody else managing it now. I don't know who. I don't think it's a community person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as we slowly wind things down, Mala, Jared, do you have any other topics you want to hit for this evening?
SQL bits, CFS, if anyone is interested in submitting, closes on November the 1st. And it's a blended conference. You don't have to travel. So please submit if you choose to speak. It's a good opportunity.
Yeah.
I've been speaking with them for 3 years and I've really loved it.
And if you do want to be there in person, then this upcoming year, it will be in, I want to get the name right. The theme is aviation. It's in Farnborough, which it will be, I think it'll actually be at an aerodrome. So the theme will be aviation. It's going to be a pretty big venue. Anders submitting emergency training in flight versus SQL.
Nice topic, Anders.
Yeah, it seems like
Yeah,
that
seems
is
super nice.
smart because that also ties in with the theme.
Well, make a nice slide deck.
Right.
He doesn't like slide decks.
Well, it'll make Anders could write it on one of those clipboards, the pilot clipboards, the knee boards. Unfortunately, too far ahead of the air show. The air show is 3 weeks later. Oh, that would be a lot of fun. But agreed, waiting, being in England for 3 extra weeks, kind of tough to pull off. Prices get pretty expensive for a lot of stuff. Ooh, swinging by home in Norway and picking up the pilot uniform. Now, would that be the pilot uniform or the Norwegian Air Force uniform? The people need to know. Can't fit in his Air Force uniform. All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, all right. I think that's probably going to do it as far as topics. I think that would be kind of illegal. That's a good question. I'm yeah, I shouldn't even try to speculate on law around that because I figure if it's intended for costume purposes, like you're at a costume party, I don't know. I don't know if you could do that. So, yeah, all right. But regular pilot uniform, no problem, apparently. According to SSMS download page, 19.1 is the most recent version. It does allow me to see DB properties on 2022. All right, so Anders, ball's back in your court. Apparently, your PC is the one that's screwy. So that bug ticket just got closed as cannot replicate. But yeah, not sure why it doesn't work. SSMS is such a complex bit of software built on Visual Studio, which is itself a complex bit of software, that
No, I think it may be connected with ADS has the same exact bug. You cannot see DB properties. So maybe it's related in some way. I don't know. It's related to machine like Windows something. That's what they told me.
Could be tied to a version of Windows, could be tied to the version of SQL Server itself, up to CU6 on 2022. Okay. So, I don't know, maybe there's some oddity somewhere in the chain, and I'm not going to be able to solve that. Maybe somebody with a debugger could figure out, and the right symbols could figure out where the issue is, but that's a pain. Blow away the jump box. I agree. That seems like the best solution. Jump boxes are cattle, not pets. So you should be able to destroy them at will. And I'm using Windows 11. Well, Solomon, we feel for you. Although, as I say that, this machine that I'm on is Windows 11. Most of my other machines are Windows 10 or Ubuntu Linux, and I don't think I'm upgrading any of those to 11 anytime soon. I just don't see 11. I don't see the big benefits of 11 that are so fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Same here, exactly. Although, when my laptop dies, I'm not going to have a choice.
Maybe. Server version of Windows, probably 2016. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I meant Windows 3.1. You better have meant 3.11 for work groups, Solomon. Otherwise, you're not on the internet. And with that, I'm going to remember every single time I had problems with winsock.dll, and we're gonna wrap this episode up because I can't deal with that trauma right now. So, Mala and Jared, it was great seeing you both in here. Everybody in chat, Solomon and Anders, good to see you there. we are going to wrap things back up, and Shop Talk will be again in 2 weeks. Remember, tomorrow, Rick Pack talking to us about Kaggle competitions. Solomon here talking to us about Windsock. And I think that's where we're gonna cut things off. So everybody, until we see you in either the next episode of Shop Talk or at the data science meeting or at a future meeting at some point in time, everybody have a great evening and take care.
Bye.
Take care.